Board members, it's 4 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Our first item is our pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, could you please read our mission statement?
The mission of the Marshall Public School District is to educate, support, and prepare all learners for success.
Thank you. Need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any additions? Hearing none, please vote. It is approved. Tiger Spotlight.
We would like to recognize first Marie Sample this evening. The Marshall Public Schools Activities Department is proud to announce that head girls cross country coach Marie Sample has been named Section 2AA Coach of the Year. Section 2AA awarded Coach Sample with this honor after the Tiger girls team won the Section 2AA Cross Country Championship in Minnetrista on Tuesday. Coach Sample has had a long record of girls cross country and track and field coaching successes for the Tigers. Earlier this season, her team earned the Big South Conference Championship as well. Marie is a first-rate coach in every way, said MPS Activities Director Rick Purrington. She's able to find that extraordinary balance of grooming one of the most competitive teams in the state while also creating a family-like atmosphere among her runners that is caring, positive, and supportive. Coach Sample is truly the model of coaching success. Her team will travel to Northfield November 5th and 6th for the state 2AA cross-country meet. So congratulations, Marie.
You want to give her award?
So if you want to step up, Marie, we're going to present you with an award.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Out of the way. What am I doing?
Looks like I'm right there.
Great photo. We're not coming over.
Great accomplishment. All right, thank you very much.
I left them to track. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Marie, for all your work.
Good luck this weekend.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
We would also like to recognize this evening Deb Herman. Deb Herman, I clicked on the wrong thing, and I'm going to give you the something else, public forum. Tiger Spotlight for Deb as well. Congratulations to Deb for being nominated for the National Life Group Foundation's 21-22 Life Changer of the Year program. Life Changer recognizes and rewards K-12 educators and school employees across the country. This program celebrates those who are making a significant difference in the lives of the students by exemplifying excellence, positive influence, and leadership. Thank you, Deb, for all of your leadership. Actually, move this back.
Better idea.
Thank you for all you do for the kids and for saving lives. But you do that.
It was in the wrong spot. I'll share that Deb was nominated from her peers, and this is something that was a new thing to me, but certainly well deserved, Deb. So thank you for all of your work as well.
She's been an excellent lead nurse for our district for a long time in many different ways.
And she's a nice person. Moving on to our public forum. Is there anybody in the public that'd like to approach the board? Now's your time. Moving on to our presentations, science and reading. Mrs.
Darcy.
Love,
Yeah.
welcome.
Darcy's here to share some of the work they're doing at Parkside this year, and this ties directly into skips that we talked about last week when we approved those.
Look at that, it's like right there. Okay. Well, thanks for having me.
So I'm here today to share a little bit with you about the science of reading, and I don't know how much you know or have heard or where your journey might be in that regard, but I'm here to share with you kind of where we are at as a district in terms of our knowledge of the science of reading and how that's impacted our plans and how we're moving forward. September of 2018, Emily Hanford wrote an article, and it was entitled "Hard Words: Why Our Kids Aren't Being Taught to Read." And that's really kind of what sparked a lot of the science of reading. And so today, again, I don't have all of the answers, but I'm here to share with you what I do know about the science of reading and, again, how that's impacted how we are moving forward. Some of you that maybe follow the state legislature closely know that the state has invested in training for teachers. It's called LETRS, LETRS, is that right?
It's funny it's spelled wrong, but yeah.
No, ironically. Yeah. It stands for Language Essentials for Teaching, Reading, and Spelling. Must be, yeah, LETRS, yeah. So that's like a $3 million project that they have passed, and it'll train about 1,500 teachers in the state of Minnesota, with a priority of our K through 3 teachers. This is kind of going on all throughout the nation as people become more aware and more knowledgeable about the science of learning or science of reading and knowing about how we learn to read. People are asking, how are we using this in our field, and how are we advancing our students? So with that, also know that there aren't any quick fixes. So it's not like just knowing about the science of reading that all of a sudden we're going to be that much better, but certainly that's a start. We need to know about how our students learn to read so that that can impact our practices. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is a little bit about the history of reading and education and knowledge about reading. And so it says, if as a child you're sufficiently motivated and come from a home where reading is valued, you will learn to read with ease. That was probably the philosophy when I was growing up and in school a number of years ago, that everybody has an innate ability. Either you're going to be able to read or you're not going to be able to read, and that's all based on what kind of a home you come from, how motivated you are, all of those things. What we know now is that that's not true. 95% of our students can learn to read with the right instruction and the right supports. Unfortunately, there is a substantial number of our students who are going to have difficulties through no fault of their own. And so our job then is to figure out what are those difficulties, why are they having those difficulties, and how can we better give them the instruction they need to become readers. Excuse me. So I want you to imagine, if you will, sitting at a track meet, and you notice the participants. Everybody's lined up at the race. There's 6 lanes. 2 of the lanes have hurdles in them. One lane has very high hurdles. The next lane has medium hurdles, and they're all the way around the track. The other 4 lanes are really wide open. So you can about imagine what will happen when the race starts. It's obviously going to be probably difficult to watch, knowing that those other kids are going to sail through without any issues, and those other 2 students or kids are going to struggle. Our job isn't to teach kids to be better hurdlers, it's to try to figure out how do we remove those barriers, how do we take away those hurdles. And so that really represents what we see throughout the nation, what we see throughout the state, and even what we see here locally. About 2/3 of our students are going to be fine. They're going to learn to read, they're going to develop all of those skills, there aren't going to be any issues. There will be 1/3 of our students who need very specialized instruction in order to overcome those barriers. So what is that then? What are those barriers, and what does that look like? So that's where the science of reading comes in, and why it's so important. We know that reading is kind of the gateway to everything. We know that 80% of people who are imprisoned are illiterate. We know that reading sets us up for success all throughout our entire life. What we invest early is what we will gain later. They say for every dollar you invest, you gain $7 back in terms of literacy. And so it's extremely important that our teachers know and understand the science behind how we learn to read so that that can help us, again, overcome those hurdles. So, what is the science? What is not the science of reading? It's not an ideology, it's not a philosophy, it's not a fad, a trend, a new idea, or a pendulum swing. We've seen that often in education. We go from, project-based learning to, direct instruction. So we've went all over the board in that regard. So that is not what this is either. It's not a political agenda. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not like buying something that we can just automatically implement and then everybody is good to go. And it's not even a single specific component of instruction, but rather it is the knowledge and understanding of, again, how our brain learns to read, what it looks like when our brain learns to read. And really, this is a culmination of study of many, many, many different fields, and probably most recently, the neuroscience. I don't know, again, if you've seen a lot of the functional brain imagery, but they're able to do brain images as we learn to read, as we speak, as we do different tasks. And so that has opened up a huge door or window into better knowing and understanding what happens as we learn to read. So the science of reading is going to help us inform how proficient reading and writing develops, why some of our students have difficulty, and then how we can effectively assess and teach and intervene for those students to be successful. So let's talk a little bit about the science. This kind of stuff just makes me excited. I just think it's so fascinating and so interesting. What's that?
I can't tell.
I know. Language, speaking, is something that develops very naturally. You talk to kids, kids learn to read. Language developed about 100,000 years ago. It was only in the last 4,000 years that we've actually learned to read and write. So our brains were never wired, or there's not a specific piece of our brain that is responsible for reading and for writing. And so, unlike the spoken language, it's an acquired skill. And so what it requires then is for our brain to make connections with the parts that we do have and the functions that it does serve. So if you look at the brain, each of those parts of the brain, the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the occipital, and the parietal lobe, all have different functions or purposes in reading. And so notice not one of them says exactly what we do in reading, but rather each of them serve a different part of that process. And so what really needs to happen is that as we take in visual imagery, our brain needs to process that, and then we need to make connections between all of those different lobes in order to transform that into a word, make a connection to the meaning of the word, comprehend the sentence or word or whatever it might be. So it's a very complicated, complex process. That process itself, all of those pathways being brought to light through that imagery, you can see in the bottom right there. So those little things there that are like the purple, yellow, green, red, those are all pathways, and they're like super highways. And so those are the pathways that are well connected in a reading brain. So as we learn to read, these are the pathways that are developed and solidified as we gain more and better skills. So I would liken it to your brain being like a forest. And if you've ever been out in the forest and seen like a little path, that's the beginning of one of those big pathways that we just talked about. But as we use it, it becomes more and more efficient. So our cells become more myelinated, and it makes a smoother and smoother path until it's very well developed, and we can do things with automaticity. And so what happens then when our paths aren't developed, or when they're underdeveloped, or when they're going in the wrong direction? That's when we have issues with decoding primarily, but reading in general. And most often it is because we're not able to decode, and that is to see something on the page and know that that letter says a certain sound, and that that sound together represents a certain word, and that as they come together, they make sentences and paragraphs. So there's a breakdown in our pathways when we know that the brain is not able to read. So we know that even as for high school students, that phonemic awareness, or that ability to connect sounds and symbols, is the best predictor of the ability to read words accurately and quickly, but then also to comprehend. And so that is one piece of learning to read, is the decoding, is being able to, again, take what is on that page, connect it with sounds to make words, sentences, paragraphs, but then also you have to have language comprehension. So those two things together come to what the purpose of reading is, and that's reading comprehension. So if you see the formula down in the bottom right there, so you have decoding in the first column, language comprehension in the second column, reading comprehension in the last column. So if you take your decoding skills times your language comprehension skills, that is going to be your reading comprehension's ability. And so if you can decode, but you do not have the language skills or the knowledge of the vocabulary that's on the page, you're going to have zero reading comprehension. If you are very fluent and can speak the language, but you can't decode, you can't take those words off of the page and make sense of them, then you're still not going to have reading comprehension. So it really takes both of those skills, the decoding and language comprehension, in order to ultimately have reading comprehension. And you can also see the other components of decoding. So it's print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, word knowledge, and fluency. So all of those pieces go together. So I'm just going to let you kind of look at that paragraph there. Can everybody read that? I mean, could you read those words? Right? Because we are proficient decoders. What if Jeremy read that out loud for us? Could you just read that first sentence?
El abuelo dormía en el sofá de la sala y los ronquidos le salían entre los dientes.
Did that help?
The Spanish teacher.
I know. I knew that.
Way to call on your
I know. I'm guessing I could call on any of you, however, to read that, and you'd still be able to read the words. But how many of you understand what is up there? We don't, because we can decode, but we do not have the language comprehension piece. So in order to have that, we need to have both pieces, the decoding and the language comprehension. So the most important piece, however, and imagine looking at that and not being able to even decode the words. Certainly you're not going to have any reading comprehension. So most often, where we really, well, always, where we need to start is cracking the code. It really is a code. It is, again, connecting a sound with a symbol. So making sense of the WH together makes the sound, the W sound. The A, what sound does that make? And then putting those together, again, through that process of learning. And so that is probably one of the biggest areas where we are starting this year, is really tightening up on our phonics instruction. There's always been kind of a controversy about how that's best taught. Whole language would say, expose kids to great books, they'll get it. Others will say it needs to be taught very explicitly and systematically. Now we know it needs to be taught very explicitly and systematically, especially for that third that are going to struggle. They need to have that very clearly shared with them, directly taught, and it needs to be spiraling so that they have that skill. So as I share that information, everybody's kind of shaking their head like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So why then are we where we are? And I think that's always what's frustrating to me is that gap of we know better, so how do we get there? How do we do better? And this isn't a phenomenon that's unique to education. It's prevalent all throughout society. This is from the science practice gap. For them, 17 years for research to reach into practice, 14 years of research, or 14% of the research actually is in practice. 18% of administrators and practitioners report using those evidence-based practices. So why is that? And that's a huge question with, I would believe, many, many answers, because I can guarantee that nobody here, nor nobody at Parkside or Southview or the middle school or high school wants kids to fail. We all want them to do well. And we're all trying to figure out how exactly is that and what exactly does it look like. But imagine, if you will, with the science of reading, we start the year, think about even with COVID, we start the year and it's almost 60 miles an hour on the interstate right away. We don't have a lot of time to find the research, to read the research, to put it into practice, to change our curriculums, to do all of those things. And that's a struggle, not just with the science of reading, but just education in general. It's costly. Our curriculum process a lot of times is a 7-year process. So we look at materials, we do our curriculum maps, and then we buy materials, and then we use them for 3 or 4 years. So it's another 7 years before you come back to that and re-examine everything. So those are just some of the reasons that I think there's that gap. But we're doing the best we can. And I think that we've made some great strides this year. We have started reading a couple of different books at Parkside, so looking at our professional development and how we can increase our knowledge about the science of reading. We also purchased the really great reading curriculum, which is, again, that explicit and systematic phonics instruction for our PK, K, and 1 students. So we're implementing that this year. We started a literacy advisory team, which just like teachers, we as administrators need to be knowledgeable about the research and learn and grow ourselves. And so that's really what our literacy advisory team, we meet monthly to kind of talk about the science of reading and how that's impacting our literacy instruction, or how it should and what direction we need to go. We have some phenomenal instructional coaches at Parkside Southview in the middle school who are really working collaboratively to, again, shape our literacy instruction and what that should look like, and consistent with the science of reading. And then we also have focused this year on our MTSS program, which is the multi-tiered systems of support. And that's really about making sure that we have an assessment system in place to know what the students' needs are, but then also to intervene early and quickly with what exactly it is that they need. So, and as our friend Maya Angelou shares, that we do the best we can until we know better, and then when we know better, we do better. So that's kind of our philosophy and what we're doing, and where we're at.
Question.
Yeah.
Marcy, you look at the professional development piece and we never seem to have enough time.
That's so true.
In the past, we have put on summer symposiums with staff, like week-long when we started guided reading, for example. I had all K through 4 staff involved with the week-long instruction, which was a foundation base.
Yep.
Is this something that you see that you'd like to do as staff?
I would love to, but we found it harder and harder even for us to find those times in the summer when everybody is available to do that. With our really great reading, we had a 3-day workshop right before school started. And it was well attended, but there still are always going to be some that aren't able to attend that. But you're exactly right. The time constraints are difficult. And I think the other piece of that is that we've done so much episodic professional development, if you will, meaning like we do a little bit of it and then we go practice and we never go back to it. And so we really have to, it has to be a continual process of learn, do, just like what we would do with students. So that makes it more difficult as well.
Are you doing, is a focus in your PACs this year? I mean,
Yes.
that would make sense.
Yes, absolutely.
I was
Yep.
gonna call it out to the PLCs, really, that's
PLCs, yeah.
that's the big advantage of having the PLCs. It's an ideal time for staff to review this work and
Yeah.
have this
Good,
conversation.
good.
and Practice and back to it.
You've got a captured audience then,
Yep,
weekly,
yes,
needing more time, however.
right. Exactly.
Are your current assessments helpful in identifying?
Yeah, I think
Anemic needs and so
we've
forth.
come quite a ways there. I think we're kind of in a, I don't know if the right term is wonky, but kind of in a wonky place because we do have the science of reading, and really what they prescribe is structured literacy, and we used a more balanced literacy approach, but not in the actual definition of balanced literacy. We've made some adjustments and refinements to that. So we're kind of having two different directions, I guess, if you will, and trying to fit them together. So that's been a little difficult, especially at Parkside, knowing that we need to teach that systematic and explicit phonics. That really pushes us to use like decodable readers so that they can practice the skills that they're learning. But if we do the guided reading, that's based more on comprehension. It's not based on those phonics skills.
But
So
it's a
that's where I
skill-
say it's
they need
hard
the
to,
comprehension skill as well.
Yep.
So your language arts block is blending the two right now,
right.
which is okay, I think.
It is. We're trying to take what we can do at the time, and it would be hard if we just said we're going to throw everything out we currently do and start all over. So that's where we've chosen to start is that, again, that systematic and explicit phonics instruction.
I'm excited about what you're doing here. I was just reading, you guys probably saw it today too. The superintendent in Minneapolis is being evaluated by the lack of literacy in the schools. And the foundation is built in the primary grades. That's why it's critical for us to have small class sizes too. Critically important.
Question for you, Darcy, and first of all, praise you for all that you do. You're a
you.
great administrator, and I love everybody at Parkside. But in 20 years, I've tried to figure this out too. And how many first graders do you have?
About 178.
Well, you take a third of those are going to struggle. And that same third's going to struggle in second grade, and third grade, and fourth grade. So is there a simpler way some way to identify that third that's struggling, which we usually know by second grade? Do we need to have more paras or more reading coaches or more?
All the above.
I know we need all the above, so, I mean, do we have a plan on how we can bring them up before fourth grade? I mean, I know we're doing the best we can, but maybe, I mean, the budget wasn't a question.
Right.
We wanted to cure, instead of 80%, we wanted to go to 90%.
Right.
Do we have a plan of what that would look like?
Well, my dream would be smaller classes so that our teachers could do some more smaller group instruction, especially at that primary age. And really, that is the key age. Kindergarten and first grade, they say that if we don't have those skills by the time they leave first grade, they aren't going to have them by the time they get to fourth grade. So it's really essential that it happens in kindergarten and first grade. So I think that's a piece of it. But I also think that, again, I'm still learning and growing also, but I always wish I knew then what I know now. But I do think that it really does start with helping teachers understand the why and the process itself, because it's like asking a mechanic to work on a car without having a knowledge of how the system works. And so I think that our teachers really first need to understand the science, but again, it's when does that happen? When do we get them that information? And it's more than just a quick workshop or a meeting after school, but it's really, you have to immerse yourself in that study and that development, because it takes a long time.
And that's a great answer, but so the third of the kids that are struggling, do we have a plan to get them caught up before another 7 years goes by?
Right.
You know what I mean? So
I
so
do.
we can reduce that. Do we have, because as an administrator, I expect you to go to the superintendent and say, we have to cure this problem, and this is the reason why. And if you have a plan and he has a plan and the board can't embrace that plan for any certain reason,
Right,
well, then they need to replace the board.
right.
But,
Yep.
so I'm just, want to emphasize that somehow we need to break that cycle.
I agree.
And I don't know how to break it.
Yeah. I think that's the million-dollar question. I think it is about getting all of those pieces and parts aligned and together. I think just what Bill and I had talked about too is that we kind of have some parts and pieces that maybe aren't exactly aligned. But I think the more we learn about this, the better off we'll be. I also think even brand new to the profession teachers, they aren't learning this in some of their graduate programs. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done throughout the whole entire system, not just at the elementary level, but even in higher education and other areas too, you know?
I agree,
What
but
you're doing, what we're doing within the profession ourselves, like you're doing right now. We sometimes create the need for higher ed to change because we've done the work
Right,
and you're doing the work. And I praise you for doing that, making your PLCs this a priority.
right,
And again, and I don't know how we can do it, people need to come together more than an hour a week, hour and a half a week to intensely bite the bullet and say, this is our top priority.
right.
I think the other thing that Darcy touched on in your presentation, those instructional coaches and that work that's taking place, that's a big part of that MTSS process, is really identifying, like Jeff talked about, who those kids are. And then we've got these staff where their job is to go into the classroom, watch that instruction and offer feedback and support to the teachers so they can meet the needs of those kids at a very individual level. That's a big piece of that work that's happening right now. And that literacy team and those instructional coach meetings and all that work, that's what that's all been geared toward. And I think we're seeing
we have-
success with that, initial stages, but.
We have other safety nets. You know, we've got Title I, we've got the reading program and assurance and mastery. All those are pieces that pick up the pieces with this third of the kids that aren't making it.
right, but it's not, for me, I don't think it's picking up enough of the kids quick enough.
I agree. We don't want any.
What I
of
would
it.
like to see is, what are we doing now to change now to pick up? If she was to come to the board, or Jeremy was to come to the board and say, we have this program, we need to implement this now to pick up this 1/3 of the kids, I'm sure the board would find a way to fund that.
I will certainly have a conversation with Jeremy because I do have some ideas.
If that was the answer, I think we wouldn't have the gaps that we have
Yeah.
nationwide. I mean, there's no panacea, there's no magic
Right.
bullet.
Right.
If there was one, somebody would have discovered
Right.
it by this point. So I think
And
we
I-
continue to look at the programs, we continue
Absolutely.
to look at what works and continue to
Mm-hmm.
work as best we can. But there's no, to believe that there's something that, some
One
rock
thing we
that
could
hasn't
do.
been turned over by now.
No, but the system can be improved to bring
Absolutely.
that 1/3 down to 1/5.
I agree, but those are hard to find because they're so
Yeah.
multifaceted.
Right. And what I shared was a quick rundown version that's very complex and complicated. But yeah, I think that's exactly true, but also our teachers are working so incredibly hard. And if there was a magic bullet or a magic answer, they for sure would also say, let's do that. But we have to find it our way and find the right,
And it's not just
Right
reading
things.
and language arts that they're teaching.
for sure.
I understand that, but I'm just getting to the point where if it's a funding issue or a
Right.
policy issue, we can change that
Right.
to speed it along. So appreciate it, Darcy.
Is this just, I mean, I'm curious, this is so new. You said that it's not necessarily being taught in college programming or a grad program.
Right.
Why not? If it's something that you're implementing in your
Yeah.
buildings, how accepted is it in the
I
education
think-
profession?
Well, and I think, what was it, 2001, when I talked about the letters training, it was like 2001 when the National Reading Panel came out with a lot of this information. So that's 20 years later before there's actually statewide legislation to support that science of reading piece. And so I think it's that gap of, and you think about too, when you think about professional journals, there are hundreds of professional journals with hundreds of research projects out there. And so if you even Google reading comprehension, you get like 15,000 in some articles just in professional journals. And so there's no way that one person can synthesize all of that and find their way through that. And so it's really a culmination of all of those sciences putting a lot of what we already know together and getting that message out there, and then finding the right tools and developing the capacity of our teachers.
And using the test data to identify
Absolutely.
the skills that kids need.
Absolutely.
That's the small group instruction you're talking about.
Yep.
And I know you're doing that.
Yeah.
Appreciate all you do. Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thank you for your leadership with that, Darcy.
You can just leave it.
Board members, it's public forum time. Is there anything that anybody would like to bring up?
We have a bond oversight committee meeting next week, I believe. And then I think Aaron and I will be traveling in a few weeks to the delegate assembly. So, for the Minnesota State Bar Association, the Minnesota State Board Association, sorry.
We have a finance committee meeting next week, Monday.
Anybody else? Moving on to SWWC Board of Directors election, everybody needs to vote before they leave the meeting. If you want any input, Mr. Coleman knows almost everybody, so he could list your top four. for you.
I'm not campaigning for anybody.
No, I know that. Moving on to discussion items, second reading of policy 501 through 504. Any questions or comments? Moving on to the discussion of our CTE Center update.
I just want to share a little bit with this. We are set to close in this center this week. And just a couple things I want to point out. So up on the screen, Tricia's putting a picture. This is attached to the board item as well. We've talked about the center a bit, but haven't shared some of the details of what we're thinking. So the picture on the screen, this is the main building when you first come up upon the CTE Center. Right now we're still calling it CTE Center. I don't know if we're going to find a different name for it or not, but right now that's what we're calling it. So there are 4 buildings on the site currently, and they're numbered on the screen up here. I'll walk through each one and just kind of share what our purposes are, what we're thinking of for each of these sites. So that building number 1, the main building, the south end of that building, you'll see it's a 2-story piece. That's the oldest piece of the building right now. That building, the second story really is not accessible. There's signs of water damage and stuff in that piece. So the idea is that as we looked at remodeling it and fixing it to be the classroom space, it was going to be more cost prohibitive to remodel than to take that piece down and rebuild that section. So that'd be the plan, and that would be the primary classroom space. The rest of building number 1 is where we'll have the automotive classes and the welding classes. There's already some bays in there and it's set up. There's not a lot of work that needs to happen in the rest of building number 1. It'll really fit the needs we have for that space well. When you look at building number 2, it's a garage kind of that's attached to building number 1. There's a little walkway between the two. Building number 2 has a lot of pieces that will not meet our fire code for schools. So we're really thinking building number 2. It's a real pole shed as a primary purpose. It's been shed, it's been tinned off and such. That building will probably have to come down before we can really use that site. Building number 3 is it's like a little mini storage kind of unit that will work really well for storage of the supplies for the welding and the automotive shop. You know, the big pieces of metal they need to store and such. And it's conveniently located there's a garage door in the back of building number 1. So I know when we had our teacher out there and looked at that site, he was really excited about that building right there with we can put all the supplies in. So that's a primary purpose of that building. And building number 4 in the back, it's a big storage shed. Right now it's going to be used for cold storage. We have a lot of things in the annex that that it's full and we don't have room for other things. So this will provide spot for additional storage. You see a small overhead door on the one side. There's a large overhead door on the end of the building to make it accessible to get bigger things in there. And then we eventually, when we add some construction trades, we feel that could be a spot that we could do some of that work, whether it be mini homes or ice houses, or if we get to the point someday a house, there's a lot of room in the back. But eventually that could be like an outdoor classroom space. for some of that work. If you scroll, Tricia, to the next picture, the other one shows like an overlay of the whole site. And the red outline around there shows the property line. So the property, there's a lot of open space in the back too. It goes all the way back to the right of way of the railway station. So a lot of space back there. You know, we've talked about, do we do a student garden at some point or something like that? I know I've seen schools that have like an orchard or some different types of things. There should be a lot of space we could do that type of place back
Put some
there.
cattle back there.
You can have cattle back there. Someone said llamas. There'd be room to expand as we have need for future expansion. There'd be plenty of room for the programming and the different things we might decide to do. Just the CNA, the welding, and the automotive will be the first classes we run. We're hoping to open classes out there starting next fall. And then, you know, in the future, there's, like I say, room for other things, but certainly thinking about the construction trades, electrical, plumbing, that kind of thing would be the next phase with the space. Questions you guys have about any of the facility? Like I say, we plan to close this week and hoping that's the next, I think, board item is, well, we'll take you guys on a tour.
Was the city gonna buy the rest of that, those other buildings, or is that still up in the air?
That part has not closed and the other part of it yet, so my understanding is there are other parties looking at, like the city, but yeah, it's not done yet.
Is there parking, and then has anything been addressed relative to how kids will get out there for these classes? If
Yeah.
they don't have a driver's license or don't drive?
Yep, there is parking, and you can kind of see on the picture, there's Deanne was out there the other day counting parking spaces, actually as part of our conditional use permit, that there's space, there are enough spaces for the number of students we'd have out there to park. And then there's some paved space in the back as well. If we need additional, we could, you know, look at paving more space eventually. I'm not too worried about the amount of parking spots. If we have students that need to get out there, like right now, we run this similar kind of thing at Maytech, and we run into very few that don't have transportation, but we would have to run a bus or something.
But the Maytech students could take advantage of that while they were there. But now
Correct.
you're looking at those,
Separate for everybody.
those having to transport
Yeah.
there.
So we're thinking these classes would be like half day, like a double block, so we could run transportation
Oh, good,
just
okay.
at those periods if we need to.
Thank you.
Staff excited?
Very,
I'll bet.
yeah.
Thank you. Moving on to our action items, approval and change to meet start time on November 15th. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Open for discussion.
And that would just be, we'd meet at 4:30, probably at the CTE Center, so we can give you a tour of that prior to our board meeting.
Very good. Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll vote. It is approved. Authorization for administration to advertise and hire 3 paraprofessional positions.
So moved. Second.
Open for discussion.
These are additional spots needed because we've had some additional students through testing require additional paras, and some additional students just enroll in our district. So we need some additional help in that department.
Meet the IEP needs.
Meet the IEP needs. Correct.
Very good. We'll vote, please. Is approved. Approval of our Community Service Advisory Board member. Motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Open for discussion.
I did interview this person. She's a young lady with a family. She will be very good for the advisory board, so.
how many candidates were there, Mark?
She is the only one. We still have another open spot yet, so.
Very good. Please vote.
On that note, just as a push, because I do some work with the city, you know, people should, if they're interested in those positions, they are available. They're on the city website. There's all kinds of commissions, but that's a really important one.
Yeah.
So just people are watching, look into it.
Very good. Very good comments. Very good. Meeting's over. Thank you, board.
Thank you.